love finding ways to use up my leftover paint, and I had some really beautiful green, yellow, and white on my palette from an acrylic painting that I had done of some lemons. So I really wanted to give this new life. So I grabbed my handmade sketchbook that I constructed myself using an old hardcover book that I had gutted and then sewn signatures into for the sketchbook pages. So I decided to just kind of start playing with color blocking and color mixing and just swatching the colors, but in a really loose way, like really kind of playing with, if you just barely mix them together, how many variations can you get when you start with a primary, a secondary, and then white to create the tints. So I built it off of the colors that I already had on my palette, so the pure colors that had come out of the tubes, but then also the colors that I had mixed up in the process of creating the lemon painting. And then I kept mixing and swirling and going from there until I filled the whole page. So the only thing that guided this really was the limitation of colors that I already had on my palette, the colors that I'd already mixed together for the variations that these three colors could create that I had used previously. And then as I went across the page for each row, I was playing with trying to make each one a little different. There's a couple in there where the colors are pretty much the same for two or three of the swatches, but I really wanted to have it transition over time. So if I had been playing with darker colors, then I started moving back towards lights. Or if I had been predominantly in the green colors, then I kind of moved more towards the yellow green and the minty and more pastel-y variations. So really kind of constantly swaying between more yellow, more green, more like darker values, lighter values, until I filled up the entire page. This was an incredibly relaxing process. It was so incredibly nice to just have some very limiting parameters that allowed for some beautiful color mixing and a really lovely session in the art studio. And it was a really fun way to use up the extra paint instead of just throwing it away, because oftentimes we can misjudge how much paint we use for a project, and I did, because I usually do. So I love to find new ways like this to use it. And then these sketchbook pages that I have, or decorative papers that I create, become really great starting points for pushing an artwork further. So this takes me from a blank page to a textured, colorful page that's filled with marks that I can then paint more into. I can draw into this, I can collage into this, and it's really another fun way to approach art making, where you do something that's very intuitive and playful and non-threatening and low stress, low stakes, and then it gives you a really neat thing to go back to. So what I'm going to do for the next one is I have so much paint on my brush, and I still have paint on my palette. So I'm just going to start doing marks across the sketchbook spread in another sketchbook that I created with a hardcover book as its foundation. This is one where I, was doing some drawings with one of my kiddos, and we were doing a workshop together online. I don't need to have this page saved for posterity. It's not a sketch that I'm like, ooh, this really means a lot to me. The moment did, but the sketch doesn't. So this is a great thing to do over sketchbook pages and spreads that you're less excited about. So this gives me another application of leftover paint that I can then use as a starting point for a sketchbook spread in the future after it dries. And I do this a lot of different ways to apply paint to my sketchbook on old pages or extra pages, just as a way to fill them up, have some fun creating, and create a starting point for something in the future. Now, I had a lot of paint left on my palette still, and I have all the insides from the different books that I gutted. So I love to do stamping too, where you take any kind of paper. It could have been a plain paper, but I was using the pages from inside an old cookbook. So the cover became the sketchbook that I started with for this piece. The inside pages are going to become decorative collage papers. They can exist as collage papers on their own, but how much more fun are they when they have some smooshes of paint on them? So I'm just tearing pages out, pressing them down, and it's really neat because you get, depending on where you rub it and how the paint is and where there's more paint left on the palette, you get different marks, but then you can also see the imagery or the text through too. So it just creates some really fun collage material. So let me know how you use your leftover paint, and I have a whole class about this on Skillshare if you want to see some other fun ways you can use your leftover paint. I'll link it below, and I'll see you next time.